Welcome to Transformational Leadership, the podcast for leaders building high-performance organizations and teams. In every episode, you will hear from executives and transformation experts who've led with vision, executed under pressure, and delivered real, scalable, and impactful results. You'll hear practical insights and leadership stories from executives who've driven change, delivering transformation, and consistently winning in highly complex environments. No fluff. Just frameworks, lessons, and stories from the front lines of leadership. If you're serious about building competitive impact through people, you're in the right place. Here is your host, Jeff Harnois.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Transformational Leadership. I'm your host, Jeff Harnois. Today, our guest is Stephen Myers, president and founder of Dynamic Beverage Consultants, a brand strategy and go-to-market strategy consulting firm serving small to mid-size alcoholic beverage companies on a global basis. His career spans 4 continents over 25 years, giving a true global perspective to leadership and transformation. At one point in Stephen's career, he founded a company called Illegal Mezcal and launched it in the US, ultimately taking it to a global scale. He then had a successful exit selling it to Tecate, a brand many of you are familiar with. As part of his consulting journey, he helped an Australian coffee liqueur organization called Mr. Black launch in the US and also take that to a successful exit. We'll talk about that a bit in today's episode. And also we'll talk about who he sold that or who he helped sell that organization to, another big brand. And Stephen has managed bars around the world. We'll talk about facets of leadership in highly intimate settings, but with a global nature and, how culture may influence decision-making and leadership overall. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to Stephen Myers. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Jeff, thank you. That is quite the introduction. Hopefully I'll live up to that a little bit.
Such an interesting background, Stephen. I cannot wait to jump into this conversation.
So we actually sold Illegal to Bacardi. Yeah, not Tecate. But yeah, please let's dive right in.
Well, let's talk about that then. When we think about transformation, oftentimes at the organizational level, it's, where are you today and where do you want to be tomorrow? And, what's the process to get there? But in this case, the transformation was really starting with an idea and taking it through a successful exit. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that journey?
Very much so. I mean, I'd love to claim it was my idea, but I was fortunate enough to fall in with someone. So at that point, I had completed a double degree, had dived into the very deep end of the corporate world with the newly formed British American Tobacco, so the merger of Wills and Rothmans, and had done an accelerated program there, had been seconded overseas momentarily, and decided that shirts and ties weren't for me. And then if I had to return to that type of world, I would. So I had left Australia, gone to Costa Rica to run rural infrastructure development programs for a global nonprofit. Had then moved across to Europe, to Luxembourg of all places, to play a bit of rugby and have a most enjoyable 2 years, and returned back to Latin America. And whilst there, managed to connect with John Rexer, so a New York native who was living in Antigua and Guatemala and had this amazing hole-in-the-wall dive bar. For those of us who are a little older, we had Willie Murphy come down. So Willie Murphy and the Bees, he produced Bonnie Raitt's first album. Probably the best live guitarist I've ever seen. We had 5 or 6 of the original musicians from the Buena Vista Social Club. So when it was a black musician invite-only club in Havana above a bakery, they lived in Guatemala. So we had them play at the bar. And John had this great idea to start a mezcal brand. And so I would back and forth between Guatemala and working at his bar and running the nonprofit program in Costa Rica, and decided that I'd throw my hat in with him. Great idea, great vision, It was fantastic to work with. So I was sort of the first one on board for that, and the brand was sort of slowly developed and sort of created from Oaxaca in Mexico, and we used to sling it down to Guatemala by some fairly nefarious needs, ways and means at times, under buses and trucks, and floating it across the river. The old National Geographic images you see with the fridges and the bananas getting floated across the river on those inner tubes? That was us. Uh, yeah, we had an alternate logistics program for a while, and when the time came, uh, was fortunate to move to New York City and spent 5 years there and launched the brand in the US and about 14 countries around the world. And as sort of the business and the brand developed, and I remained on the board, um, sort of the needs of the business changed, and I saw a really big white space for brands wanting to know what we'd done with Illegal and sort of the hows and the whys and the whos. And so I decided to hang my own shingle and create Dynamic Beverage Consultants. And so that was, and we've spoken of this before. That was sort of the moment of Marco Pierre White with his big hair and his cigarette and his tagline of "Fingers are made for burning." I decided that I'd burnt my fingers enough, and if I could help other people with their brands and businesses not make those same not so much mistakes, but not get stuck on the same roundabouts and not hit the same dead ends, because oftentimes sort of businesses not succeeding is death by a thousand cuts. And if I could help them as a brand and a business owner move along that sort of that life cycle sort of faster, more effectively, more efficiently, hopefully with a bit more sanity and a bit more cash in the bank and a bit more joy in what they do. That's what I wanted to do. And so that was the genesis of Dynamic Beverage Consultants.
Well, thanks so much for laying that foundation and providing that context. A couple of things came up for me while you were describing it. The first one is, thinking about Illegal and its initiation and where it started. One of the things that you said that resonated with me is the fact that you paired up with somebody who was a bit of a visionary around these products and around this market. And one of the things that is often overlooked when we talk about transformation is how important getting the right people involved in this transformation is. So that really resonated with me. The second thing that resonated with me, and I'm laughing about it a little because I think this is true for myself. We see all kinds of consultants in the world. And I have to tell you, this is my own bias, but consultants who have done the work, using your analogy, who've burnt their fingers and then can help others because of that industry knowledge and because of the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into solving problems and really launching successful transformations and then offering that to others so that they can go faster in realizing their own transformations. I think that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it's a practical playbook rather than a theoretical one. Uh, and yeah, like there's no reason not to stand on, like we said earlier, to stand on the shoulder of giants.
The other thing that I was kind of smiling about as you were talking was all of the logistical issues. I'm imagining exactly what you said there. The National Geographic images and trying to move product from Mexico into other countries and crossing borders and not only the physical aspects but maybe some of the political aspects that were in play at the time and influences and having to solve those problems. It's really interesting to me.
Very, I mean, it's fortunately we were bringing things from north to south. Usually the journey from south to north is a little harder. Uh, but yeah, I mean, it's a funny lens to look at it, but it teaches you sort of the soft skills and the emotional intelligence of reading situations and people and resource management and knowing what to do and when and having plans, right? And sort of that story of the best laid plans, right? They always go out the window. And so we got into and we can have a chat about this over a mezcal or two. Got into some not unhairy situations that could have very much gone either way. until it got to the point where we decided that everybody sort of had all their fingers and toes, and we were all okay. It was time for the next evolution, and that was a good thing. And so yeah, as the business grew, so did sort of the volumes that we were selling and everything else, and so we took that next evolution.
Yeah. And again, what's coming up for me here is, when we talk about transformations or in this case, evolutions, which is a form of a transformation, the requirement for what I would call nimbleness, organizational nimbleness, and situational adaptability. And some navigate that better than others, and others really wrestle with, the fact that we have a plan and the plan isn't working, or the plan requires something else to be successful. And so, one of the things that I think when we talk about organizational transformation is that mindset of anything can and will happen. How are we going to be ready to overcome it? And it sounds like you've got that mindset in spades.
Yeah, like you said, it's a funny balance between sort of being determined and sort of sticking to a plan and an objective, but there's that sort of adage now of failing fast, and that's where I think I've sort of been fortunate enough where I have been in the trenches for a very long time, and fortunately with the 20-year roller coaster that Illegal was on, and me being on the board and getting that exit, I also got to see it from the 50, 60, 100,000 foot and go, okay, I need to look at this from a sort of a short, medium, and longer term perspective. But I also need to know how to walk through the door and sell a product or engage with the consumer. Because too often, and sort of through no fault of their own, people do get stuck in offices, and it's distances themselves from the product or the service that they're selling, or the consumers that they're targeting.
Yeah, staying close to the customer. And again, when from a leadership standpoint, one of the things that I always encourage my leaders to do is push decision making downward in the organization and as close to the customer as possible, because that's where the best decisions are going to get made. And it really speaks to your point here, which is when you lose that connection, I think sometimes decision making can go astray.
Very much so. Again, it gets back to that practical versus theory. If you're stuck in the office all the time, then it's more theoretical rather than a real world decision. You can project and plan and theorize, but when that rubber meets the road, it can be very different. So you do need that feedback, and you need to empower your teams to make the decisions, but also be able to manage upwards.
Yeah, wow, what a great observation. That's exactly right. Moving decision making down into the organization creates ownership. And when you have ownership, then you can have accountability. But the combination of those things is where scaling comes from, right? The ability for you to then do exactly what you're describing, which is managing up, managing expectations, clearing decks, getting funding and approval for investments that need to be made for the growth that you're looking for. Exactly the right, let's call it the right chemistry here for success.
Very much so. I mean, that also goes with expanding your geographical footprint. If you don't have sort of you get your testing and learning, so in the beverage space, sort of there's I'm very big proponent of narrow and deep, right? I would rather sell 10 cases to 10 accounts than one case to 100 accounts. I manage 10, I do really well, I get the velocities and the volumes. If I sell one to 100, I get really good at doing one thing, and I can't really manage 100 accounts nearly as well as I can do 10. Build the team and empower them and have them making that decision making when you launch in a new state or a new country, right? Yes, you're starting from scratch to a certain degree, but you have the learnings and then you can build them up. Otherwise, you'll end up with 10 markets and you're trying to manage all these people and all these supply chains and all these complexities at the same time, and you just overload yourself with work.
Wow, that's really interesting. I'd like to pivot over to Mr. Black. Mr. Black is an Australian coffee liqueur brand that is a client or was a client of your consulting firm. Tell me a little bit about that story.
So Australia is world renowned for its coffee. Um, Starbucks has been a abject failure down there, because people would prefer to go to the local cafe or coffee shop because they make better coffee. And and the sort of the founders of Mr. Black sort of realized that there was a big need for a really good coffee liqueur. So they'd done particularly well in Australia. They'd launched in the UK, and then sort of the US is the biggest liquor market in the world. So ultimately, any brands sort of who want to grow cast their eyes towards the US. And I was fortunate enough to know the distributor of Mr. Black in Australia. And as they were looking, he said, "Oh, you need to get in touch with Steve. This is who he is, and this is what he's done." So we got Mr. Black started over here. I mean, I think at the time the US was drinking something like $9 billion worth of coffee a year. So it wasn't unknown. It was sort of, when you say coffee, if people, even if they don't like it, they, in their mind's eye, they know what it smells like. They know what it tastes like. There's a degree of familiarity. Right? So we just sort of presented that we were doing it better than anyone else. And we played up the stunt accent, and we played off that we're Australians. Australians generally sort of fight the good fight in the US and do particularly well and work extremely hard. It's a good work ethic that we all have. And so that got up and running, and we started to take over and grow. And unfortunately, COVID sort of really changed things up there. And that sort of happened a lot with the liquor landscape. And that can be sort of for another podcast in regards to sort of transformational stuff. And so my time with Mr. Black sort of came to a conclusion, but ultimately they were acquired by Diageo, which is essentially the biggest publicly listed liquor company in the world. Again, we were fortunate enough to get the right brands in the right hands, and be part of two brands that were great from a product, people, and packaging perspective. Jesus, was that 4-piece? To be good enough to be looked at sort of by global strategics to be acquired.
Yeah, and Diageo, for the audience who may not be familiar with that, is the parent company for brands like Guinness and Johnny Walker, who people are probably familiar with.
Yeah, if you're into your tequila, they have Kettle One. Oh, sorry, Vodka Kettle One. They have Don Julio. Yeah.
Well, all the biggest and best brands. And so you sort of set them up for success in being able to exit to Diageo. And what I'm really interested in, Stephen, is initially, when it started coming together, how did you think about, you know, growth? What were the strategic signals you were looking at that, made this particular transformation one that you thought was worth pursuing?
So when I first moved to the US, I would go to the opening of an envelope. If there was an event, I was there just to meet people, to build the network, to make the connections, to introduce Illegal and everything that I was doing there. And I have a big sort of philosophy, and it sounds a little strange, about being sticky, right? I may not be your gin guy, or I may not be your beer guy, but if I do my job well enough, I'm a couple of degrees of separation from anyone. And if you ask me for a connection, I'll get it. So when something comes up, "Oh, Steve, I've got a hotel chain that really needs a coffee liqueur." Oh, fantastic. Like, just be sticky so that if someone needs help, or if something good comes that might be of relevance to me, it just flows straight through. And so that was a big effort, and sort of always has been. And then,
As you're talking, a couple of dots are connecting for me here. You call it being sticky, which is what I would call a connector's mindset. Earlier in our conversation, we were talking about resiliency and adaptability, as some of the key success, let's call them attributes for transformation. I think one of the things that enables that is this sticky mindset of maybe not being the subject matter expert, maybe not having the exact, on deck resource ready to go, but having those connections in place that allows you to call them up and, deploy them as needed. That has to be from my perspective, one of the foundations of your success. Would you agree with that?
I would. I mean, it's very much like when you said sort of when you start an organization and you've got to build an amazing team, right? You bring in people who are better at their jobs than you are, right? To build that team. For the longest time, I had a business card that had fixer. Whereas what do you do? Yeah, I just pardon the French, I just fix shit. And I have my fixer when it comes to other like even crazier stuff. So yeah, everybody needs a fixer, but it's a good thing to do, right? You're helping people, be it personally, professionally, strategically, whatever it may be, and yeah, being that connector, and like you said, you don't have to be the content matter expert all the time, but if you know someone, then that certainly helps.
Yeah, I'm smiling again because what's coming to mind is if you're not the fixer, you should at least have one.
I had I had one, and this is a little bit of a segue. A friend called me and he said, I need a dentist. I went, what are you calling me for? I'm not a dentist. And he went, no, I need a dentist in Riga. And I went, I live in Guatemala. And he went, you're the fixer. Like he said, a friend's there and he's in a really bad way. I went, a dentist in Latvia. I went, all right, give me a couple days. And I called my guy and I said, all right, so today's challenge is a dentist as soon as possible in Latvia. And we had this kid in and out and abscess and busted tooth done within 2.5 days.
Wow.
And my guy said, that's why I called you, because you're the fixer. So yeah,
What a great example. And I love it also because it's on a global scale and you're reaching across the earth and still making things happen. That's really cool. Stephen, one of the topics that we had talked about previously, and I'm fascinated by this. We'll pivot into managing bars on a global basis. And again, for me, the thought space is around obviously cultural differences, especially when it comes to leadership. How do you identify what the cultural drivers are, and how do you learn them, and how do you implement them in a successful basis? Relationship building has to be a component of that, again, with all of the nuances of the local cultures. And then what comes to mind is, we're doing this in a bar setting, which has a pretty high degree of intimacy, or you're very up close and personal with your customer base, with where the revenue comes from. And so I'd love to hear a bit about, first top line about your leadership philosophy in that kind of setting.
so I mean, we'd sort of obviously try and be as judicious as possible in sort of employing people and building a team. But again, as we spoke earlier about sort of empowering people, my golden rule was, if something happens and you tell me this is how it went down, I will back you 100%. We can sort it out later, and if that's maybe not happened or there was something else that you weren't aware of, but when it comes to things going bad, because oftentimes, like, and people, you know what happens in bars sometimes, like if it goes loud, it's going to generally go really loud really fast. So you need to be that leader and sort of management aside, to be the sort of the leader, and to take care of your team. You say, like, I'll back you and we'll take care of this on the spot. Then then we will sort of sit down and talk our way through it, and maybe work out what we need to do differently next time. Uh, but every time, I'll back you 100% every time when it goes down.
I think what I'm hearing is really building relationships on a foundation of trust, which is key. I think that's key, for success for every leadership role and every team. When we think about team cohesion and high performing teams, we just don't see high performance when trust doesn't exist. It also sounds like there's a little bit of a conflict management standard that you're applying here. Tell me the story, then let's figure out, what happened, then figure out what we need to do next in response to it. Does that sound right for you, that flow?
Hopefully, we sort of, obviously you have sort of structure and rules and things around operating, and hopefully sort of we'd got them trained well enough and sort of they were they were good enough at their jobs that they would make the right decisions sequentially or whatever it may be. And sort of the team would be there to help support it. And then, but if that wasn't working, then that was sort of something that I would need to look on and sort of review the structure or how we went about things. I pulled a lot of the leadership that I had in, again, like you said, those intimate sort of environments, and who knows why people walk into a bar, right? So you've got to have that sort of soft touch. I played in coach sport, again, across continents for years and years and years, oftentimes in places where I didn't speak the native language, and played in a few representative teams here and there. And the one thing I noticed about playing sort of selecting for representative teams was that they picked people who would play as a team. Like, you could be the greatest person, but if you didn't gel and you didn't gel quickly and well, then they were never going to be selected. And I remember one night in the rain and the mud, pulling together like a bunch of guys who I'd never met and said, look, we got a week and a half to make this team. And they're not going to pick individuals. They're going to want to pick guys who can play as a team. And I think this is the style that they want to play. So if we do it like this, they're going to pick all of us. Of course, they know they've only got another 2 weeks to have us gel before the big matches are. So if we can play as a team sooner, then it's more likely that we will get that lovely blue jersey and sort of the tracksuits and all the cool stuff that you get when you make rep teams. And so I brought that philosophy across too, to try and build teams as well and as quickly as I could.
You're reminding me of something. There was a movie that came out a number of years ago here in the US, and I think the title of it was The Miracle on Ice. And it was, I want to say it was the 1988, I could have the date wrong, but it was the 1988 Olympics. And it was the coach of the US team. And there was a conflict with some of the characters there, and some of the recruiting folks and the scout folks were bringing in top talent from the US and Canada to build this team, and the coach was rejecting these folks who were in some cases the best in their particular discipline in hockey. And finally, the coach said, I'm not trying to build a team of the best players. I'm trying to build the best team with the right players. And the message was exactly what you're talking about. How do people come together as a team and operate cohesively? Not the stars who are going to operate independently of the team, but who are the people that are going to come together and work as a team, because you can always get much more done with a team than you can as an individual. And, ultimately they ended up winning the gold medal, out of all of the odds that they faced. And they were certainly nobody was betting on them to win. And they did because of that philosophy that it sounds like you share also.
Yeah, and you lean into people's strengths. Obviously you sort of, hopefully you can make them sort of well-rounded and good at many things. But there's no point sort of starting and emphasizing the things that they're not great at, right? Let them be good at the things they're good at. Give them successes. Then you add layers of responsibility and work and everything else. And sort of that way you can lead the individual as well as the team. And a good manager basically earns themselves out of a job. That's my theory.
I want to pause there for a second, because that is a really, really deep topic that I'm super passionate about. And it really looks like this. The best leaders in the world have that very same philosophy or a variation on it. And here's what it looks like to me. You are going, as a leader, you are going to develop your team to be as autonomous as they can be in running the business. Again, all the way back to that foundation of pushing decision making down, so that, I don't know what the percentage is. Maybe it's 80% of the business or 90% of the business is managed by the team. Ultimately, that work yourself out of a job kind of a thing. Why would you do that? Because it seems counterintuitive, right? Why would I work myself out of a job? That's where my paycheck comes from and all of that. Well, the answer in my mind is When you elevate your team to operate at that level where you've essentially, removed the interdependency of you as a leader and their ability to function, then enables you to go seek new opportunities within the organization to create value, to create and deliver value. And I can't tell you what an epiphany it is for some of my leaders when they finally connect with that particular thought, which is, oh, I don't have to manage the tactics. I don't have to manage the day to day operations if I can elevate my team to do that in the right way and trust that they'll be able to and know that they've got the competency to. And rather than not being valued in the organization, it creates the space for me to then go create more value in an organization. It sounds like you share that philosophy.
Yeah, if you don't, then you're essentially pigeonholing yourself to that role forevermore.
I think pigeonholing, but also stagnation.
Yeah, I'm sure we all have plans and goals, and we want to change sort of certain things that we do in our career. I mean, if that's if that does it for you, and you want that role, then I get that. But then, yeah, that's not sort of what your team would necessarily want either.
What Gosh, you said something there that is absolutely magical to me, Stephen, which is this. When we get this balance right, when the leader is now freed up to go look for to create more value for the organization, that in turn creates more growth opportunities for the team. And so if you get the team on board, it is absolutely best for them too.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not everybody sort of running in the same direction. It's everyone heading to the same focal point.
Yeah, unity. That's my favorite word. My favorite word of team and leadership. It's about unity, getting everybody on the same page, alignment, executing together, focusing on all the right priorities. Yeah, and this is definitely not a unicorn. This is something that can be built, but you have to do it with intention and focus.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you've got to, like you said, you've got to go from the trenches to that 50, 60,000 foot. But you've also got to be quite deliberate. And like I've been pretty fortunate enough to have like this wide and varied sort of countries and roles and sort of, I think when I was leaving university, they said everyone of your generation will have at least two major career changes. I think I got a few more than that. But I've also got sort of the learnings from being in the cultural and the linguistic minority, sort of having to like every day, right? Living in somewhere where you don't speak the language. I mean, I love it, and it's challenging and interesting and hard. And if I can bring all those learnings into what I do as a leader or when I work with clients, and it doesn't necessarily just have to be the specific logistics of a route to market plan, but it's all the soft counsel that comes along with that. That's what I try and do as well.
Yeah, I love that. Well, Stephen, how did you get here? How, what were the formative elements for you? Think back to your childhood or your origin story. What were some of the big events that shaped how you approach life and business and leadership and transformation today?
I think parental support to start with. My parents were country kids who ended up moving to the city. Uh, always super supportive. Again, let me make my own mistakes to a certain degree. So it was always that learning, always encouraging. I sort of pretty fondly remember this one when I told my mother that I was off to go and do this overseas. She went, "I'm surprised it took you so long."
Really? Oh my gosh, I love that.
And I went through the process, and I went, right, high school, I need to go to university because if I go overseas, I don't think I'm coming back. So I went to university. University, I need to get a job because if I go overseas, I don't think I'm going to come back. I went overseas and I didn't go back. I mean, you see family and stuff, but yeah, 2003, and I've never sort of lived and worked at home since. So I think it was always there. There was always that little bit of wanderlust and wanting to put myself into challenging situations.
Love that.
And then sort of being the domino that goes to the next, to the next, to the next.
I also, the thing that came out of that story for me that sort of resonated was how much clarity you had about the decision making. In other words, you knew that once you went overseas, you weren't coming back, and how that influenced your decision making into then going to university. And but again, the clarity and the foresight into that is really amazing. The other thing that I often hear is, how influential parents are in, shaping the individual and your strategies and your philosophies and your values too. So really glad to hear that.
That empowerment, and I always kind of thought that if I sort of got into somewhere, then there would be sort of multiple choices. I didn't have to stay in Sydney and do that forevermore. But that said, it's not for everyone. It really is not. There's some days where you sort of go, I just wish I had a job.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, everybody's an entrepreneur these days, whether they truly are or not. But it's a it's a heavy sort of emotional, and it's a heavy physical load.
It's also a heavy intellectual load, right? Especially if you don't have that vision and foresight. Can that be learned? Yeah. Can it be trained? Yes. If it doesn't come natural, is it easy? No. No. And so again, sort of having the wherewithal, the resiliency, and the energy sources to keep going, absent the confidence of knowing that you're doing the right thing and just having faith that you are.
Yeah, it's almost like you have to be eminently flexible, but with a spine of steel.
Yeah, that brings up something for me, and I've shared this in a couple of other episodes that we've done here on the podcast. I'm no longer intimidated by what I don't know. I'm not intimidated by what I don't know because of my ability to know. And I think that thinking and that mindset really opens up all kinds of interesting possibilities and sort of quashes the fear and the voice in your head that says, "Oh, you're not good enough," or "Danger, Will Robinson." It sort of quiets those voices and allows you to move forward, making, maybe bolder decisions that you wouldn't have previously. And so I often share that here because I really hope that people are inspired by that. Maybe not even inspired, but maybe take on their own mindset shift to say, when I look back over my life, I've learned a lot, which means I have the ability to learn more. And so I'm going to lean in those areas where I'm not the subject matter expert. I'm not the main voice in the room, but I'm still going to engage anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, I think, sort of without sort of trotting out all these old lines, I think it sort of comes to three things. One, try not to be the smartest person in the room, right? Which means you are putting yourself, and you got to be comfortable in being uncomfortable, right? Whether sort of social situations or business situations or sort of whatever it may be. And when I got seconded to Papua New Guinea when I was working with BAT. I was fortunate enough to work with one of the smartest guys I've ever met, and I had to do a presentation. And he said, "Okay, in 3 days' time, your presentation is going to have to include this level of detail." And I went, "Okay." And he said, "No, it's not. It's not a sphere with a data point. Your whole presentation has to be at that level." That's what he said. Didn't give me any more guidance or anything. It's like, wow. And so I built this sort of theory of concentric circles, right? And as you get better, try and get better at many things, not just single things. And it doesn't always happen in perfect concentric circles, but sort of improve and get better and better and better and better. And sometimes it's a fast move to the next circle. Other times it's quite a long one. But sort of that life, not necessarily lifelong learning, um, but sort of, yeah, try and be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah, a couple of things there. The smartest person in the room comment hits me pretty hard too, because when I'm leading teams in transformation, uh, there are times when I'm absolutely leaning on my knowledge and my intellect, but my preference is to never be the smartest person in the room because that means there's someone in there that I can learn from.
So I think there's a difference between expert and the smartest. Like oftentimes when you are hosting that, they are there for your expertise. Right? When you stand in, and sort of this is one of the great things about sort of hospitality in the beverage space is we sort of mingle with everybody, right? We're involved in whether it's corporate or hospitality or sort of sporting or whatever. We sort of the breadth of engagement that we have is fantastic. And I may get up on stage in front of 1,000 people, and they're there to hear me about a specific topic and my expertise. Does that make me the smartest person in the room? And knowing me, absolutely not. So sort of you can walk that balance of be the expert and help people and educate them and empower them, but also be willing to have someone put up their hand and ask some question that you may not have necessarily thought of, and just go, "Wow, that is clever." So you should be both, and it's humbling to be both too.
One of one of my favorite facilitation moves, when I'm on stage and doing that kind of work, when somebody asks me a question and I don't have an answer or I know I don't have a good answer, I will turn it around and I'll ask the audience.
Yeah, and I'm not afraid to say I don't know. When there's clangers, you go, "Whoa, I can't talk my way out of this one," or it's something that you shouldn't. You know what? Actually, I don't know, but I'll get back to you. Or let's work on, especially when you've got a team. Let's work on this together.
Yeah, yeah, love that. Let me ask you a couple of other quick questions, and Stephen, feel free to have fun with this. By the way,
Have we not been having fun thus far?
I've been having a ton of fun, and I've enjoyed the conversation immensely. Um, a couple of questions that I ask my guests: what was the best piece of advice you received and didn't take?
I mean, there's the always say yes, but that's within reason. Probably you're braver than you think you are. Often, like, oh, I can't do that. Like, I'm not ready for that, or I'm not good enough. But then, sort of, if you're there's that surfing analogy: if in doubt, paddle out. Right? Right. There's some things where if in doubt means you're thinking maybe I can, maybe I can't. If you're thinking maybe you can, then you can. You may not do it well, but you'll still do it. And the learnings that you get from that. So I like that if in doubt, paddle out, and you're braver than you think you are.
I love it. Love it. Excellent. If someone were coming up in the food and beverage or hospitality world, somebody entering into that space, if you had to give them, if you could only give them one piece of advice that would contribute to their success, what would that be?
Network.
Network. Oh my gosh, yes.
When it comes to, I mean, I'm sure it's sort of with other industries as well, but particularly sort of with beverage, right? You need branding, marketing, finance, fellow entrepreneurs, people who have done it before.
Logistics, operations.
And nobody starts a liquor brand or a coffee brand or a soft drink brand or whatever it may be to raise money. But that's what you do. And that merry-go-round never stops. And you never know who you're going to meet. Like, again, we're fortunate enough, like everybody drinks, whether it a beer, a wine, a non-alc, whatever. It's a gathering for something like that is a social lubricant, right? And it's part of our lives. And sort of you never know who you might meet.
And then my final question, and based on your answer, it may not be my final question. Um, what advice would you give to people who are at your level? Think, maybe peers, something you've learned or some bit of wisdom that you would want to share with them that would help others be successful. What would that be?
I get told this all the time. I'm probably a little too free with my giving of information and help, but it comes back in spades. It truly does. The same with being a leader, right? Sort of, I get more, especially particularly with mentorship. You get more out of being a mentor than a mentee, I think, and a professional level too, because especially now, sort of like our parents, right? There was there was either no TV or it was black and white TV. And if people's parents are sort of our generation sort of are still alive, they got pocket computers, they got people living in outer space, like the rapidity, the velocity, of evolution in regards to technological and thought process and how things happen, even to like the speed at which AI is developing. Right, speaking to the younger generation, they look at things so differently. Right, so for a very large degree, you're not helping them. Maybe you're the old man who yells at clouds and gives them some sage counsel here and there, but they are looking at sort of what you do in your business and the world totally differently, and they're the future. So sort of best get dialed in with them as quick as you can.
Love that. That's excellent. Well, Stephen, I just want to say thank you for joining us today. I've really, really enjoyed the conversation. Super interesting. Really, really interesting perspectives, coming from beverage and hospitality, and, everything from entrepreneurship to leadership to, exiting great brands, all with great transformation stories. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for having me on.
And what would be the best way for someone to get in contact with you if they wanted to? Is LinkedIn it?
LinkedIn, Stephen with a PH at dynamicbeverage.com. Or if Instagram is your thing, Steve is Illegal.
All right. Stephen, thank you. And I can't wait for our next conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jeff. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
The Transformational Leadership Podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes vision, action, diagnostics, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, be sure to let us know in the comments. We'd love you to join the conversation and help us transform the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are transforming organizations, leaders, and teams. In the meantime, be sure to like, subscribe, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.